Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Tonight's story comes from a guy named Gord Whitlock, 58 years old, out of a small town near Kingston, Ontario. 31 years he spent running the line at the same steakhouse. Same grill, same regulars, same Friday night rush. The kind of man who measures his whole life in prep lists and portion sizes. Gord had a plan. Simple one. Work the line till retirement, then go quiet somewhere warm. What he didn't plan for was losing nearly half of everything he'd saved right before he was supposed to walk away from that kitchen for good. This one's not a total scam story. It's not a fairy tale either. It's somewhere in the middle. And honestly, that's what makes it stick with you. Gord ended up building something in this country. Whether it was a life or just an expensive lesson, well, he's still working that out himself. Here's his story, in his own words. 31 years. That's how long I stood at that line. Same steakhouse the whole time. Out past Kingston. One of those places with the laminated menus and the Friday crowd that never really changed. Just got older with me. I could break down a ribeye in my sleep. Still can, probably. People ask what a chef does for 31 years, and I always say, same thing a soldier does. You show up. You do the job. You don't think about it too hard, because thinking gets you burned, literally. Look at my arms sometime. I'm not an emotional guy. Never was. My ex-wife used to say, I fed people instead of talking to them. And she wasn't wrong, but I never saw the problem with that. A good plate of food says more than most conversations do anyway. 3 years before I was supposed to retire, a buddy of mine from the Legion, good guy, played darts with him every Thursday for going on a decade, comes to me with this cannabis stock thing. Sure bet, he says. Ground floor. Everybody's getting in on it. I'd never invested in anything in my life. Kept my money in GICs like my father did, because that's what you do when you grew up watching your old man lose his shirt on some scheme or other. But this guy, I trusted him. 10 years of Thursday nights. You start to think you know somebody. Put in more than I should have. Told myself it was a calculated risk. There's no such thing as a calculated risk when you don't know what the hell you're calculating, but nobody tells you that till after. Watched it drop. Slow at first, the way these things go. You keep thinking it'll turn around. Then it doesn't turn around. Then, one day, you're doing the math at 2 in the morning, and you realize you just lost close to half of what you spent 3 decades building. One double shift at a time. I didn't tell my kids. Couldn't. My son's got his own family now. My daughter's just bought her first house, and here's their old man, supposed to be the steady one, and I go and do something that stupid. Something a first-year cook wouldn't even fall for. So I didn't say anything. Kept showing up to work. Kept smiling at the regulars. Nobody at that steakhouse had any idea I was quietly panicking about a retirement that wasn't going to look like what I'd told everybody it would. That's the thing about my generation, I think. You don't talk about it. You just carry it around like a hot pan, and you figure eventually you'll set it down somewhere. So there I am, 55 years old at the time, divorced 11 years, kids grown and gone, a retirement fund that used to mean something and now meant a lot less. And I start doing what guys like me do when they can't sleep. I start watching stuff on YouTube. At first, it was just noise. Recipes I didn't need, hockey highlights, whatever. Then one night, and I couldn't tell you why, the algorithm serves me up this video. Some guy, sounds American, standing on a beach somewhere, telling me I could retire like a king in the Philippines on $1,200 a month. I remember exactly what I was doing when I watched it. Eating a bowl of cereal at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and didn't feel like cooking, which, if you knew me, you'd know how bad things had to be. Raisin Bran, if it matters. It doesn't. But I remember it. And this guy's talking about beachfront condos for the price of a Toronto parking spot, cost of living so low you barely feel it, weather that never drops below 25 degrees. And I'm sitting there in my one-bedroom apartment in February, snow piled up past the windowsill, eating dry cereal because I didn't want to deal with milk going bad. And I thought, why not? Why the hell not? Wasn't just the money, if I'm honest with myself. It was the idea that nobody there would know what I'd done. Nobody would be doing the math on me. Back home, even if I never said a word, I'd still feel it every time I sat across from my kids, wondering if they were doing the math themselves. Over there, I could just be a guy. Fresh start. Nobody counting my losses for me. I watched 3 more of those videos before the sun came up. Didn't sleep a wink. Kept thinking about it through my shift the next day. Burned a batch of onions, I was so distracted. First time in years I'd done something that careless on the line. I'm not saying I decided that night. Took me a couple months of research after that. Forums, spreadsheets, the whole thing. Because that's how I am. I don't jump into anything without knowing the cost breakdown first. 31 years in kitchens, you learn everything's got a cost breakdown if you look hard enough. But that night, sitting there with my cereal going soft in the bowl, watching some stranger promise me a whole different life for the price of what I used to spend on groceries in a month. That's the night something in me decided I was done just carrying that hot pan around. I wanted to set it down somewhere warm. I had no idea what I was actually walking into. None of us ever do, I suppose. But that's getting ahead of myself. Took me about 2 months of digging before I actually booked anything. Forums, mostly. There's this whole world out there of guys like me, retired or half-retired, posting on expat boards about exchange rates and health insurance and where you can still get a decent steak. I read every thread I could find comparing Thailand and the Philippines, because those were the 2 everybody talked about. Thailand kept coming up first, always does. But something about it felt like more admin than I wanted. Different alphabet on the signs, temples everywhere. And I kept reading about how you needed a Thai company or a nominee setup just to do anything with property. Which, turns out, I should have paid more attention to that part regardless of which country I picked. Funny how that works. Philippines just sounded simpler. English on the menus, English on the road signs. Everybody I read about said the same thing. You can get by day 1 without learning a word of anything. And for a guy who still can't order a coffee in French after 2 trips to Montreal, that mattered more than it probably should have. Cebu specifically, because a guy on one of the forums, screen name was something like Island Retiree 67, kept posting these detailed cost breakdowns. Rent, groceries, a beer at the local sari-sari store, all itemized like a proper invoice. I respect a man who itemizes. Told me Moalboal was quieter than the city. Good diving, if that interested me. It didn't really, but cheap, and close enough to Cebu City, if I needed anything. So, that was that. Booked a flight for the following spring. The flight itself was brutal. Toronto to Vancouver, then some ungodly long haul into Manila, then a puddle jumper down to Cebu that felt like it was held together with duct tape and prayer. 28 hours door to door, give or take. I landed feeling like a piece of meat that had sat out too long. First thing that hits you stepping off that plane is the heat. Not just hot, wet hot, like walking into a steam table straight out of the dish pit. And the noise. Horns everywhere, these little tricycles buzzing around like wasps, somebody's rooster going off despite it being 2 in the afternoon. I stood outside the airport for a good 5 minutes, just letting it wash over me, thinking, well, Gord, you've done it now. But people were kind. That's the thing that got me early, before anything else did. The girl at the little convenience counter in the airport, around the clock, or some name like that, she called me sir about 4 times in one transaction and smiled like she meant it. Tricycle driver who took me toward the bus terminal for Moal Bowl wouldn't stop asking about Canada, snow, hockey, whether I'd met anyone famous. Never once made me feel like a mark. Not yet, anyway. Found a little place to rent, 1 bedroom, tin roof that turned every rainstorm into a drum solo, ceiling fan doing its best and losing. 15,000 pesos a month, which worked out to something like 360 Canadian. And back home, that wouldn't cover half my old apartment. Felt like I'd cracked some code nobody back at the Legion knew existed. Settled into a routine pretty quick, because that's what 31 years in a kitchen does to you. You can't function without a routine. Mornings I'd walk the beach road, afternoons I'd read or nap, and evenings, most evenings, I ended up at this resort a short tricycle ride away. They did a buffet dinner, and something about a buffet line felt like home. I'd stand there a beat longer than I needed, checking the chafing dishes, seeing if the lation was holding its temperature properly. Old habits. Ate alone every night. Didn't mind it at first. Brought a paperback, some John Grisham thing the first had already read twice, and just sat there working through a plate of adobo and rice, watching families and couples around me doing what families and couples do. Maybe, the 4th or 5th night, this woman starts sitting near me on her break. Resort uniform, name tag said Maravic. Not sneaking up on me or anything dramatic. Just, she worked events at the place, and her break happened to line up with my dinner, and there weren't a lot of other empty tables. She noticed the book first, asked if it was any good, said she'd read a couple of Grishams herself back when she was in school, said it plain, not flirty, just making conversation with the regular who was always by himself. Told her it was decent. She said something like, "You eat here every night, Poe." I said something dumb back, told her the lechon was consistent, which for a chef is basically a compliment on the level of a marriage proposal, and she laughed. Actual laugh, not the polite customer service one. She was 34. Told me straight out, no games, when I made some comment about her looking too young to have a real career behind her. Said she had a nursing diploma, actually, 3 years of it, but there weren't jobs for nurses out here that paid anything worth having. So she did events instead. Weddings, mostly. The odd corporate thing when Cebu City clients came down. There was something in the way she said it. Tired, but not bitter exactly. I recognized that particular tired. 31 years of Friday rushes will give a man the same flat sound in his voice when he talks about what he actually wanted to do with his life. We didn't talk long that first night. Maybe 15 minutes before her break ended and she had to get back to seating charts and centerpieces. But it was the first real conversation I'd had since landing that wasn't a transaction. Wasn't ordering food, wasn't haggling a tricycle fare, wasn't small talk with the landlord about the water pressure. Before she went back in, she pulled out her phone, said if I wanted actual food, not resort food, she could point me toward some places locals went, added me on Facebook right there at the table. Maravic Bantayan, profile picture of her at some fiesta, flowers in her hair. Didn't think much of it walking home that night. Figured I'd made a friend, maybe. First one since I'd landed. Had no idea how much that little Facebook ad was going to end up costing me, and I don't mean that the way it probably sounds right now. It's more complicated than that. Give me a minute, I'll get there. After that first night, it wasn't a straight line to anything. I want to be clear about that, because if I make it sound like some big romance montage, that's not honest. It was slower than that, more like the way you build a sauce, little additions over a long simmer, and you don't notice how much it's changed till you taste it again. We kept ending up at the same table most nights. Sometimes she had 10 minutes on her break, sometimes 25 if the event coordinator let her go early. I started timing my own dinner around when I figured she'd be free, which, in hindsight, tells you something about how fast a lonely man will reorganize his whole evening around 15 minutes of company. She told me more about the nursing diploma. 3 years at a college in Dumaguete, her mother had scraped and borrowed to send her, and then she graduated right into a market with more nurses than hospital beds. Said most of her classmates were in the UK now, or Saudi, or on some cruise ship somewhere, sending money home. She stayed because her mother's health wasn't good, and somebody needed to be close by. I remember thinking, that's a hell of a thing to give up a career for. Then I remembered I gave up plenty myself, just never called it that. Her family had a small rice operation out in Negros. Her father's side originally, not big, a few hectares, enough to feed themselves and sell a bit at the local market when the harvest was decent. She talked about it the way I talk about the steakhouse. Something that owns you a little, even when you complain about it. I want to say something here, because I think about it a lot now. Before I ever got on that plane, I read the horror stories. Every forum's got them. Guys my age, some kid on Only Friend Finder or whatever the app was, 22 years old, gorgeous, gone the second the money stopped. I braced for that. Genuinely thought that's what I'd be dealing with, some kind of performance. Maravic wasn't that. 34, tired eyes some mornings, worked a real job with a uniform and a name tag, talked about her mother's blood pressure medication like it actually mattered to her. Not like she was setting something up. And I'll be honest with you, that's exactly what made me let my guard down. Because the warning always came with a certain shape, and she didn't match the shape. Should have understood that predators come in every shape there is. Didn't understand that yet. She started teaching me bits of Bisaya, laughing at how badly I mangled it. Taught me utang na loob, this idea of debt of the heart, the obligation you carry when somebody's done something for you, especially family. Explained it plain, no pressure in it, just, this is how we are. This is why I send money to my mother every payday, even though I barely make enough myself. I didn't think anything sinister in it. It made sense to me, actually. 31 years in kitchens, I know what it is to owe somebody. Owe the guys who trained you. Owe the regulars who kept the place afloat during the slow years. About 6 weeks in, she mentioned it almost sideways, the way people do when they don't want to ask directly. Her younger sister was short on tuition for the semester, some private college in Cebu City, nursing program, ironic given how things worked out for Maravic herself. Needed about 15,000 pesos, she said, which I did the math on later. Works out to around 340 Canadian. Nothing to me. Less than a week of groceries back home some months. I offered before she finished the sentence. Near enough. She said, no, sabi ko lang, just telling you, not asking. I said, I know you're not asking. Sent it through Gcash that same night anyway. She actually got upset with me a little. Said something like, Gord, you don't have to prove anything to me. I'm not with you because of money. And here's the thing nobody tells you about that line. It's supposed to be reassuring. It landed the opposite way on me. Made me feel like I'd been picked for something other than my wallet, which, for a man who'd just watched half his retirement vanish because he trusted the wrong person, felt like something close to being chosen. I think about that a lot now. The way refusal can pull you in tighter than a request ever could. Nobody warns you about that angle. They warn you about the ones who ask. Nobody warns you about the ones who say they don't need it. Somewhere around the 2-month mark, I gave up my little rental near the resort and moved in with her, over in a subdivision closer to Panagsama, a 2-bedroom concrete place with a tin gate that squealed like a pig every time you opened it. Told myself it was practical. Rent alone would have saved me maybe 8,000 pesos a month, something like 190 Canadian, and I've never once in my life turned down a way to cut costs. That's the honest reason I gave myself. There was probably another reason underneath it I wasn't looking at too hard. First time I went out to Negros was maybe 3 weeks after that. Took the ferry from Cebu City over to Dumaguete Port. Then another hour and a half by Habal-Habal and Jeepney out to the family place. Small house, concrete block on the ground floor. A bit of bamboo and plywood added on top over the years, the way places get built out there. One addition at a time as money allowed. Chickens in the yard. Her father, sitting in a plastic monoblock chair under a mango tree, looked older than I expected, grayer, moving slow. Turned out he had diabetes, had for years, wasn't managed properly because managing it properly costs money they didn't reliably have. I noticed the insulin was being rationed a bit, stretched further than it should have been, and I didn't need a medical degree to see that wasn't going to end well if nobody stepped in. About 6 weeks after that visit, middle of the night, Maravic gets a call from her mother. Her father had had some kind of crisis, blood sugar crashed, ended up at the district hospital in Bayawan. I watched her on that call, watched her face, and there wasn't anything performed about it. She was scared, real scared, the kind you can't fake at 2 in the morning half asleep. Hospital wanted a deposit before they'd admit him properly. That's just how it works over there. No insurance like we've got back home. You pay as you go or you don't get treated. Simple as that. Total came to around 180,000 pesos by the time it was all said and done. Tests, medication, a few nights' stay. Worked out to about 4,100 Canadian. I sent it in 2 batches through GCash, first 80,000 that first night, just to get him admitted, rest over the following week as the bills came in. Didn't hesitate sending it, and I want to be honest with you about why. Wasn't pure generosity. Some part of it was, sure. But some part of it was, this is my woman's father, dying maybe. And what kind of man sits on his hands doing math while that happens? 31 years of feeding people, you don't turn that instinct off just because the bill's bigger than you're used to. Her mother called me anak that week, first time. Means child, more or less, term of endearment. Sat me down, held both my hands in hers, thanked me in this long string of Bisaya I only understood maybe a third of. But you don't need the words for that kind of gratitude. Felt real. Still think it was real, for what it's worth. Around the same time, started noticing her brother Ricky at these gatherings. Younger than her, maybe late 20s, drove a tricycle for a living. Always had some story about bad luck, a broken axle, a fare he never got paid for, a friend who owed him money and wouldn't pay it back. Nobody asked me for anything directly on his account. Not then. Just these long sighs at dinner, her mother saying something like, "Si Ricky, laging may problema. Ricky, always some problem." I noticed it, filed it away. Didn't think much more of it. Not yet. That's around when her cousin Boye first came up. Contractor, apparently, built a few houses out that way. Decent reputation locally from what I was told. Somebody mentioned, almost in passing over dinner one night, wouldn't it make sense for Maravic and me to build something out here eventually, on family land, instead of me renting forever? Said it lightly. Like an idea floating past. Nothing pinned down, I remember not saying much either way that night, but I remember doing the math on the walk back to where we were staying, in my head, the way I used to cost out a menu. Land's free, it's family land. Labor's cheap out there compared to home. And I've got savings sitting doing nothing in a Canadian account earning next to no interest. Didn't say yes to anything that night. But I didn't say no either. And I think that's usually where these things really start, the night you don't say no. Boyet came by the apartment in Moelbol maybe 2 weeks after that dinner conversation, had a folder with him, actual folder, plans drawn up by hand mostly, some measurements, a rough sketch of a 2-bedroom bungalow with a covered porch. Sat at our little kitchen table drinking a San Miguel I gave him. Walked me through it, like he'd done this 100 times, which for all I knew he had. Told me straight off the bat, the land issue. Foreigners can't own property here. He wasn't the first person to explain that to me. I'd read it on the forums, plenty. But he said there was a way around it. Set up a corporation, Filipino majority ownership on paper, obviously. But I'd be a shareholder, director even, name on record, protects your investment, he said, same as if you owned it outright, practically speaking. Had a lawyer he used before, cousin of a cousin sort of situation. Everybody's connected to everybody out there one way or another. Said the whole setup would run maybe 40,000 pesos in fees, under 1,000 Canadian. Nothing in the scheme of things. I want to be honest, I didn't love the sound of it. Something in the back of my head, some old instinct from running a kitchen where you learn real quick which suppliers are square with you and which ones are working an angle. That instinct was humming a bit. But everybody around that table was family, or near enough to it. And Maravic sat next to me the whole conversation, hand on my knee under the table. And I think I wanted the instinct to be wrong more than I trusted it to be right. Total build cost, once we sat down properly with Boyet's numbers, came out to 2.1 million pesos. I did that math 3 times before I believed it. Roughly 47,000 Canadian. Near enough my entire remaining savings, what was left after the stock business took its bite. I remember sitting there with my phone calculator, and it's a strange feeling, watching a number turn into your whole future in real time. Told myself it made sense anyway. Rent's dead money, everybody knows that. My old man used to say it too, paying somebody else's mortgage. Here I'd have an actual asset, more or less, a place with my name attached to it even if the deed said corporation instead of Whitlock. And land's family land, so no purchase cost there, just the build. Compared to buying a comparable place back in Ontario, this looked like a bargain, even accounting for everything. Maravic tried to talk me down from the full amount at first. I'll give her that. Or at least she did in the moment. Said maybe start smaller. 1 bedroom, add on later as money allowed, the way most houses out there get built anyway. I was the one who pushed for the full plan. 2 bedrooms, proper kitchen, tiled floors instead of just poured concrete. Because I kept thinking, if I'm doing this, doing it once, doing it right. Chef's instinct again, maybe, always wanting the finished plate to look complete, not half-assembled. We started construction that October. First disbursement went through Boyet directly, 300,000 pesos for foundation and initial materials, about 6,800 Canadian. Watched a video call of the groundbreaking, Maravic's father out there in his monoblock chair again, smiling. This deep, genuine kind of smile I hadn't seen on him since before the hospital business. I flew out to see it in person maybe 6 weeks later. Foundation poured, some block walls starting to go up, rebar sticking out the top, waiting for the second floor. Looked real. Looked like something actually happening. Not just numbers moving around on a phone screen. I stood there in the heat, sweat soaking through my shirt, within about 10 minutes of getting off the habal, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like a man building something instead of a man watching something fall apart. Should have paid closer attention to how fast that feeling arrived. Hindsight's a hell of a seasoning, makes everything taste different after the fact. But standing there that day, watching that skeleton of a house catch the afternoon light, I wasn't thinking about red flags. I was thinking about where I'd put a hammock on that covered porch. By month 10, we were 80% done according to Boyer, or so he kept telling me over the phone. Roof was on, electrical was roughed in, just finishing work left, tiling, fixtures, paint. I'd sent through most of the 2.1 million by then in stages, and the last piece he wanted was 250,000 pesos, about 5,700 Canadian, for what he called the final push. Windows, doors, the septic system, finishing carpentry. Something about that call sat wrong with me. Can't tell you exactly what. No single word or number that tipped it. Just a feeling. The kind you get in a kitchen when a delivery driver's story about why the fish is a day late doesn't quite line up. Doesn't quite not line up either. Just sits there slightly off-center. So instead of wiring it, I told Maravic I wanted to go see the place myself first. Surprise visit. No warning to Boyer or anybody. She didn't fight me on it, which I noted at the time as a good sign. Figured a woman with something to hide might have talked me out of it. Took the ferry over alone that time. She had work she couldn't get out of, or said she did. Habal driver out from Bayawan port didn't recognize the address at first. Had to call somebody, and that alone should have told me something. A finished house 2 months from completion, and the local drivers never heard of it. Got there, and there wasn't a soul on site. No crew, no tools laid out, nothing. And the house looked exactly the way it had looked 6 weeks earlier when I'd last video called with it. Same rebar poking out. Same half-tiled bathroom floor. Maybe a third done. Sitting under a skim of dust, like nobody'd touched it in a good long while. I stood in what was supposed to be the kitchen. My kitchen, more or less. And just stood there a minute, not thinking anything in particular. Just letting it sink in the way you let a bad piece of news sink in before your body decides how it wants to react. Maravic's mother came out from the main house next door, saw me standing there, and her face did something I won't forget. Not surprise exactly. More like a woman who's been carrying something heavy and just watched somebody else finally see the weight of it too. She started talking, mixing Bisaya and English the way she does when she's upset, and I caught enough of it. Said Ricky needed help. His tricycle broke down for good this time, wouldn't start, engine block cracked, and he'd been talking about getting 2 more units, starting a small fleet, habal for hire, and some of the house money. She said it plain. Some of the house money went there instead. Said it like a confession she'd been holding in her mouth for weeks. Finally spat it out, because there I was standing in an unfinished kitchen, and she couldn't hold it anymore. Asked her how much. She didn't have an exact figure, or said she didn't, but from what she described, sounded like most of that final push money, and some before it too, had gone sideways into Ricky's business instead of into my walls. Rode back on the ferry that evening, and I don't remember much of the crossing, if I'm honest. Just remember staring at the water, thinking about every disbursement I'd made, every video call where things looked further along than maybe they actually were, wondering how much of it I'd actually seen with my own eyes versus taken on faith. Sat Maravic down that night back at the apartment. Didn't yell. Never been much of a yeller, my ex-wife used to say. My anger came out as silence, which she meant as a criticism, and probably was one. She didn't deny a word of it. That's something, I suppose. Started crying almost right away. Real crying, not performance. Or if it was performance, it was a better one than I've ever seen from anybody. Said Ricky came to her, not to me. Wouldn't have dared ask Akano directly, went through her instead. And she said she couldn't refuse her own brother. That's utang na loob, she said. You don't turn away family, even when you should. Said she meant to tell me. Said she'd been trying to find the money to cover it quietly before I noticed. Said she was sorry, over and over. Sorry, sorry, Gord. I'm sorry. I believed some of it. Still do, if I'm honest with you. Doesn't make the math hurt any less. Didn't leave that night. Didn't leave the next week either. Stayed 8 more months, if you can believe that. Which I know doesn't sound like a man who just got told the truth about where his money went. But grief and love don't run on the same clock as good sense, and anybody who tells you different's never been 58 years old and half broke. And still, God help me, wanting to believe in something. We tried to fix it those 8 months. Talked about finishing the house smaller, cutting our losses, 1 room at a time the way she wanted from the start. Never happened. Money just wasn't there anymore. Not in any amount that mattered. Boyette stopped answering calls the way contractors do when the wells run dry. House still sits out there in Negros, last I heard. Rebar rusting a bit more every rainy season, half a kitchen and no roof over most of it. Did the math finally, properly, sitting alone one night with a bottle of Tandway I didn't need. Out of the 2.1 million I'd put toward that house, I got back maybe 300,000 pesos of value, if I'm being generous, foundation, some walls, materials that are actually there. Rest of it, near enough 38,000 Canadian, just gone. Add the medical money, the tuition, small stuff along the way, and I was down around 43,000 total by the time I tallied it honest. Left in the end without much drama. No big final scene, no slam door, nothing you'd put in a movie. Just 2 tired people who'd hurt each other about as much as 2 people who still cared could manage, sitting at that same kitchen table where Boyer once spread out his folder, agreeing there wasn't a way back to where we'd started. Moved to Dumaguete after that. Small place, university town, quieter than Moalboal, cheaper too, which mattered plenty by then. Cook for myself most nights now. Nothing fancy, adobo, sometimes just fried rice and egg. But I take my time with it, which I never used to do. 31 years of rushing plates out a window will do that to a man. I still think about Maravic, not with the kind of bitterness you'd expect, or maybe you'd want to hear, if I'm honest about what makes a good story. Part of what happened was real. I believe that. Part of it was her family leaning on her past what any person should have to carry, and part of it, if I'm not letting myself off easy, was me wanting so badly to build something after losing so much that I stopped asking the questions a smart man asks. Doesn't make me a victim exactly. Doesn't make her a villain exactly either. Just makes it what it was. If you want the lesson, and I figure that's why you're still listening, it's this. You don't hand a family your whole ticket before you've tasted what they're actually cooking. Portion control. Every single time. Doesn't matter how good the smell coming off that kitchen is, you taste first, small plate, before you order the whole spread. I skipped that step because I was hungry. Hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food, and a hungry man makes bad orders. Still got my pension. Still got most of my dignity, whatever's left of it. After telling you all this, and somewhere out there's an unfinished house, with my name on a piece of paper nobody in that province is ever going to look at twice. That's Gord's story, told the way he lives most of his life, plain, a little wry, No self-pity dressed up as wisdom. What strikes you listening to a story like his isn't the scam, because it's not really a scam story, not the way some of the ones we've covered on this channel are. It's the way real family obligation and real exploitation can sit in the very same house, sometimes the very same person, and how hard that is to untangle once you're standing inside it. If there's a takeaway here, it's not "don't fall in love," and it's not "don't help people." It's pace yourself. Verify what you can verify. See the thing with your own eyes before the next big check goes out, the way Gord finally did, just a little later than he should have. Thanks for spending this time with us. If Gord's story hit close to home, or if you've lived something like it yourself, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Until next time, this has been Inside the Philippines.